So
unfortunately.
I think we have to make, I've obviously, as some of you know, I've spent a lot more time studying the media than studying
Yeah.
philosophy. So media is
Okay.
my
Yeah. Yeah. So
métier.
you're the one
Yes.
who
So
authored this. Yeah.
yeah. So, first of all, as far as the New York Times, I've been saying for decades, the New York Times says all the news that's fit to print. So that's a lie.
Yeah.
It's not all the news that's fit to print. It's all the news that a small band of editors at the New York Times deems fit to print. Or, for example, Walter Cronkite, the lionized anchor on the
Yeah.
CBS, he used to end his broadcast, and that's the way it is. Well, that sounded good, but actually, what Walter should have said is, and that's the way a small band of editors here at CBS News think you should think it is. But obviously, that doesn't scan that well. So there's no doubt that the media are very, very biased. But that said, there's still a big difference between the New York Times and CBS and even MSNBC on the one hand, and Fox News on the other hand, which, by the way, when they were saying they were fair and balanced, that was also just as much an error as all the news that fit the print. Nothing is fair or balanced. They were basically presenting a point of view, fine. But a lot of the stories that you hear on, Tucker Carlson, Hannity, and so forth, not on every Fox News show, are basically just, not even in the most remote sense factual. So it's not a question of not covering this or covering that excessively, which is what the Times and progressive media do all the time. So they're far from perfect. It's a matter of pushing lies. And again, for example, whatever we may think of Trump, he didn't win the election, right? He lost the election. There's no doubt about that. And yet Fox News and Trump's supporters here in the United States keep saying the election was rigged. And what more do you want? These two guys in the state of Georgia who are both Republicans, the governor of Georgia and the Secretary of State, they're furious at Trump because they don't like their integrity being criticized. They know that the election wasn't rigged in Georgia. They did extensive work to make sure that didn't happen. They recounted the votes. So what are you going to do when you have Trump and his supporters and some people on Fox News saying the election is rigged? That's not in all the news that's fit to print wrong or error. That's just it's not an exaggeration. It's just a point blank lie. So that's, I think, what the problem is. So it's not that people are reacting, or at least I'm not reacting against just Trump per se, but there's a difference between exaggeration and distortion, which all politicians do, including Obama, including the most beloved progressive politicians in history. They all did that. But there's a difference between that and just outright fabrication. And that's, I think, where the conflict, meets to some extent an irresolvable situation, because how can you accept a lie? Or in Popperian terms, if somebody makes a claim and it's false and it's falsified all over, how can you continue to have dialogue with that person if they continue presenting that falsified claim as if it was not falsified?
Okay. So I again see psychoanalysis as an intermediary ground together with Karl Popper. So Karl Popper and Paul, that is objective knowledge. He makes very clear is the reading and the writing and the printing press. And then if you think about it from a world too, it's actually storytelling. And storytelling, you could call that the metaphysical research program. That's a story. And that story begins when the child kind of enters language, and it depends on the culture where it grows up. And so you have certain traditions of telling stories, and some traditions are the monotheistic stories, where there's one person in charge, and then there's someone on earth as the representative of the one who's truly in charge. And you have all sorts of variations of that. And then you have more pantheistic way of thinking that things are interconnected, or you have multiple gods who are fighting among each other, and that's the reason we are fighting on earth. But so those are children's stories who kind of become more and more sophisticated. And these are happening in our head. And that's what they do in psychoanalysis. They try to see, so what is your story that you have been telling yourself since you were born? And so what Popper is basically saying is, yes, that is the case. You argue, and by arguing, you actually check your story by science, by the way. You check your story against reality, and then you argue, and you update, and you help each other, and your story becomes more and more accurate. And but nevertheless, it's still a story. And so now, what do we have in the United States? A lot of people with some story coming from the evangelicals, that there is this big guy in the sky and the end is coming and it will be while we're around. And so what they're hearing is things that fit already with their own narrative. And now I'm saying it in the simple terms from the angle of the evangelicals, but there are many variations of that, because the progressive or some version of it as this idea of there is a future where everything is perfect and we're like one step away, and look, there are the guys who are blocking my progress, so they're the bad ones, we need to get them out of the way. That's another simple story. And Popper, I think, is telling, no, it's all of us together, and we all have a world too, and we talk through each other with the help of world three. And we have a choice, like we kill each other or we learn how to argue. And that's the fourth function. And I'm curious, in your work, how much, I did research at some point, how many people acknowledge that the fourth function is a separate, unique fourth function of language? And I've not seen too many who say, yes, it's a separate function. I've seen most people just say, oh, there are the three functions, and then a few exceptions that say, yeah, and Popper said there's also the argumentative function. So Paul, in your work, argumentation, how is that presented? I'm just curious.
Well, it's an interesting point, because I mean, this gets back again to our discussion of criticism.
Yeah,
There's like a popular, and I think very wrong and dangerous uh, attitude that a lot of people have, and it's reflected sometimes in the media, that argumentation is not a good thing. You know, that you know, why can't we just find common ground to agree? There's too much vitriol out there, or vitriol, however you pronounce it. And I think that there has been an evolution in the media, which is very unfortunate. To get back to the New York Times and Walter Cronkite, there was a time when most media at least gave lip service to, first of all, presenting as much factual news as possible. And second of all, when there was a difference of opinion, presenting that difference of opinion. And what has happened in the last 10 years, and this certainly predates Trump and everything that's going on now, is what now sells, what now keeps people most interested in the media is no longer fact. It is ratification of what they already believe to be fact. So what the media present is no longer news. The media present just opinions that support what they think their viewers already like. And that explains the dichotomy. Here in the United States, we have three major cable news stations. You have Fox, which is on the right. You have MSNBC on the left, and then CNN tries to stay in the middle, but they pretty much veer to the left also. And so, in terms of what you're talking about regarding argumentation, there's unfortunately a reduction of argumentation and that argumentative function. By the way, there is a writer by the name of Andrei Mir, and Mir is short for his Russian name. He's now in Toronto, New York. Um, he's just written a really excellent book about the decline and fall of journalism. And I'm going to be writing a review of it sometime in the next month or so. And I strongly recommend it. In his book, he goes into, the history of journalism, how what journalism originally did and what people wanted it to do was to present news, albeit imperfectly, but how in the 21st century it has increasingly veered into presenting just opinion, and worse than that, not just opinion that you agree with. So that, I think, is a very unfortunate, development. And I think, it pertains to all aspects of communication. It's in social media, it's on television, and so on. And so that's not a good thing. And I hope that there can be, to some extent, a retrenching of journalism, in the immediate and continuing future, to get more away from just expression of one opinion to at least expressing a diversity of opinions, and also throwing in a little real news in there as well.
Well, we've got a problem with that program in Australia, Paul. Our university schools of journalism, on the face of it, would be probably certainly as left wing as any other departments of universities. And you know how humanities and social sciences have gone so solidly left wing to the point where you can hardly find conservatives. So that journalism, as it's taught in Australia, does not have a great future, at least in terms of moving the direction you and I want it to go.
Yeah, well, nobody cares what we want to happen.
The other thing is that in the U.S., most journalists are run through the Council on Foreign Relations, and so they're very interventionist, whether they start off left or not.
Yeah.
There are many systematic programs to produce the outcome we see.
May I'm just totally Ian Sutty totally like entered my mind. This, what I see is the simplistic reasoning, and that's the reason I earlier brought up the 6-month-old baby. You just have the two categories, and it frustrates me to death that people always talk the left, the right, as if there's only two categories. The left, it doesn't have any meaning. It means 20,000 different things. The right, the same thing. It depends on who you're talking to. So it's like someone who's trying to move forward and they're staying in the same area. And there is this little booklet by Harry Frankfurt. It's called On Bullshit, and it was popular at some point. But it's actually the Vienna Circle and the logical positivists who were trying to figure out how do we have a useful way of communicating that we avoid empty bullshit, because bullshit is neither false or true. So bullshit is like really perfect to say whatever you want to say, because no one can say that it's false, because it's so vague. There is always a situation that it is true. And so that is what we have to, that I think the last 4 years, in this whole thing between Trump and the media or whatever, both sides said something that was true, but they said it in a language that you really couldn't have traction, because it was manipulative. And now the question is, was it manipulative due to incompetence, or was it manipulative deliberately? Because George Orwell wrote this book. So all these works have been out there, like how you can manipulate people by bombarding them by messages, and one of them is true and 99 is false. So the 99 variations of what is really true, and then people can get truly confused because everything is a little bit true. So what do you think about independent journalism, Paul? Are they being kind of the new hope, or and I'm talking this because we have Ithaca College, and I don't know whether you heard about their school of journalism or whatever, school of communication, and what your opinion is on it.
Yeah, I haven't looked into the Ithaca program in particular, but as far as independent journalism, this gets back to something we were talking about a couple of hours ago, about the value of technology and technological extensions, and in particular, the value of social media. One of the good things that's happened in the evolution of journalism and media is it's never been easier for a person to be an independent journalist. You know, once upon a time, 30 years ago, what did it mean to be an independent journalist? Well, either you wrote something out and you went to some Xerox shop and you made a bunch of copies and you mailed it out, very limited distribution, or you had to find some kind of publication somewhere that would be willing to put your work, you know, out there. Now you can be an independent journalism, and it's been this way increasingly, you know, with the arising of blogging now almost, you know, 20 or more years ago. You can, you know, write it, publish it yourself, generate a list of people, you know, that subscribe to your work, and you can make your contribution that way. So I think that the web and social media in general have been a boon to independent journalism and independent ideas and their communication and dissemination. And conversely, I think what's been happening is there has been a tightening among more conventional media outlets, because they are in very serious shape. And again, according to Andre Meir, he thinks that other than the New York Times and the Washington Post, that most newspapers are going to be totally gone in 5 years.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Yeah, and he has a lot of evidence to show it. I mean, people just are not interested in reading papers, but it's not only newspapers. The truth of the matter is, and this is the interesting, ironic thing about Trump, most people, whatever side of the issue they're on, agree that Trump has been an incredible boon for cable television, because MSNBC, for example, they have doubled their number of viewers in the age of Trump, because again, they want to get the assurance and the ratification of hearing those views that they, you know, detest. And, you know, Fox News has done just fine. They were doing well even before Trump. But Meir argues, and I agree, that even that is temporary. What is happening is the mass media in general, which come from an older system in which advertisers supported it and people got the information for free, and there was a whole tradition of presenting the facts, not opinions, that the advertisement underpinning of that has already fled to the web. And therefore, all that's left. Why the New York Times is doing great in terms of digital subscription, because what they're doing is they are endorsing the political opinion of the Times. But that's not going to last too long. That's a bubble. And when politics change, what's the Times going to do? So, look, honestly, you know, as far as newspapers per se are concerned, Tina, my wife, who loves doing crossword puzzles, for some reason that I don't understand, loves doing them on paper. You can do it online, but that's the only reason why we subscribe anymore to the New York Times. I haven't picked up a copy of the New York Times in years. You know, I read the Times online. I mean, maybe I picked up a copy, but the problem is, you know, the physical newspaper, it was always fit to wrap yesterday's fish in. Now it's pretty much fit to wrap today's fish in, you know, or whatever the proper thing is. And so I think, you know, what's happening is independent journalism, to get back to Margaretha's point, is on its own beginning to get a much stronger role in public discourse. And I think that's to the good.
One of the problems is that so many different things are happening at the same time. So, as you say, there's a potential for independent journalism now that never existed before. Like I got my website and my blog and this and that, which never would have been the case. But at this parallel with this, there's been developments in academia. Standards of civility have declined. So there's the polarization of political opinion, and that's happened in parallel with the opportunities of independent journalism. But those parallel developments have also tended to corrupt So if we could have just got the benefits of the independent journalism without these corrupting influences which happen to come in at the same time, not as a result, but just by accident. So that's made the whole thing extremely problematic. So we just have to press on making the best that we can with the opportunities, but with deploring and despairing about what so many people are doing with that opportunity.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay, dus I'm adding again a psychoanalysis of the Scottish variety, because it's called this object relations. So because it's definitely different from Freud. Dus that, and it's not just there, but there is this paradigm, we're storytellers, and that goes with Popper's World 3. Dus we read, we write, we talk, we listen, and we produce knowledge artifacts. And so we need a university that tells, yeah, we're all storytellers, and this is the way you tell stories, and you can use them to kill each other, to manipulate, but also to find the truth. And so now you have a responsibility, every human being, and you need to acknowledge the truth about yourself, that you're a storyteller and that there are mechanics at work, and that you will be manipulated unless you do an effort to not be manipulated, because there's always someone going to try to manipulate you, because it has worked in the past, and there is great money to be made from manipulation, and advertising is like the most innocent form of manipulation. But so if you go to that psychoanalysis literature, there is kind of a way to actually object relations, to tie together with categorical logic, and with Karl Popper, and with Karl Bühler, and with Alison Gopnik. I mean, at least that's the way that I'm optimistic. So I'm not optimistic in the David Deutsch way that the computer technology is solving it, but that a group of people all over the world is recognizing the value of storytelling as a paradigm. Let me say it in this way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me just mention actually two things on storytelling. Alexander Marshak, Marschak, Alexander Marshak, The Roots of Civilization.
Aha.
He
Yeah.
published it maybe like 1971. And that book basically argues, you know, in this like endless, what is the defining characteristic of humanity? And Marshak says it's storytelling. And as an anthropologist, he tries to go back into prehistoric history and give evidence that storytelling was always a fundamental part of human life and civilization.
That's pure Popperianism. But Popper, in his evolutionary account of language, he says, you know, we start off with expressive, we move to the signaling, and then with the descriptive, we get storytelling. And that's the big breakthrough is the storytelling. But then once you get competing stories, then the question is which one's true? So, and that's where the argumentative function emerges out of the conflict of stories.
Yes, good point.
He even suggests that can I just say one more thing? There's a paper he wrote where he got right into the babbling of infants. He thought that the babbling of the play and babble of infants or young children is where some significant evolutionary development in language occurred. Do you remember that paper? It was published in some obscure collection.
No, it does ring a bell, but I don't remember much about it.
Anyway, let's just get back to the point you're about to make.
Yeah, I was just going to say though, on this optimism level, and you know whether we have optimism. So, and this becomes a question of, you know, belief, not something that's really ultimately provable. But as Ray knows, I've always been persuaded by John Milton's Areopagitica, and that's why, again, I'm so vehemently against censorship, that I do think, by and large, not all human beings, but most human beings, enough human beings so that this is a viable path forward, can usually tell truth from falsity. And, you know, because we are fundamentally rational. And yes, we are driven by our emotions. We're riven by our emotions. You know, there's no doubt about that. And we make bad decisions based on that. But that's why I tend to be, yes, that is the Alexander Marshak, Margaretha just put in the chat. So that's why I'm fundamentally, ultimately optimistic. But on the
Yes.
other hand, I admit that optimism has been sorely tested the last
Talking
couple of
about talking about optimism and the move away from mainstream, or what we conceive to be mainstream media now. I think there is a move away to YouTube and Twitter and other, and the optimism I have is that I do believe that because we are rational creatures, we do have a general and fundamental curiosity in the way the world is. And from that, I would guess that there is a market for journalism that upholds and admires the classic standards of journalism. Looking at least at two sides of a story, at least two sides. And two very nice examples that I've seen on YouTube are the Joe Rogan series. Rogan is a particularly good example
Yeah.
because he's very good at bringing together people of very diverse, even, you know, quite very different opinions, and kind of acting as a medium in which very tension-filled ideas can be heard and exchanged. What is your opinion?
I've seen some of those, and I agree with that. Again, in Andre Mears' book, and you know, I haven't gone out and looked at these works myself, but Mears seems to be a careful enough researcher. He cites at least 4 or 5 examples over the past 10 years of newspapers that have tried to do what you're talking about. And all of them got off to good starts, and all of them failed within a few years.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate. But I'm not clear whether that is something that's that reflects a problem with newspapers or a problem with people not having the tolerance now to hearing both sides. Something related to this, which is a long-standing thing that again McLuhan used to like pointing out, is that the media in general, and this is especially the electronic media, television in particular, their idea of news is almost always bad news. And so that's what we're constantly fed. And that's what riles people up. You see infuriating news all the time.
Yeah.
And so McLuhan, and way back in the 1960s, so somebody asked McLuhan, so what are you saying? There's no good news at all on television? McLuhan said, oh yeah, there is. It's in the advertisements. That's the good news. That gives you that. So that was a pretty astute observation. But I think that the problem, related to a balance and diversity of opinions, is also a truly representative news presentation in any medium would present a mix of good news and bad news, because good things happen to people, bad things happen to people. I mean, I think the population in general is interested in that, but the media have evolved to just be presenting bad news. But I think you see, the thing about YouTube is, if you already are financially comfortable enough to not worry about how many viewers you're going to have, what kind of advertising revenue you might be able to make or not make from YouTube, you can do whatever you want there, and that's wonderful. And again, that is, I think, a genuine breakthrough in media and communications. The problem with television is, hey, I would like to have a talk show on MSNBC. Hey, if you're listening, put me on. Well, there's zero chance of that happening. If I'm lucky, maybe I'll get interviewed for like 3 minutes on some kind of show, and then I'll quickly put it up on my YouTube channel because I'm so egotistical. But the fact is, I'm not likely to get a show, and neither are any of us on any major medium. So the best that we can do is YouTube. But then the problem is, who's going to know about it? And can we make a living doing that? And the answers to both those are those things are not easy to come by.
Oh, okay.
Can I supplement my point?
Yeah.
Yeah. With regard to the Joe Rogan series in particular, it's surprisingly popular that the 3-hour programs, 3-hour discussions on an issue with 2 or 3 guests. That's what struck me, and they're very well conducted. I actually thought, Paul, that you're easily at Joe Rogan and above level. If you could easily do that, and maybe you could get also an $8 million contract with Spotify.
Right.
But I was struck by how popular these episodes, an individual episode can easily go up to 3-5 million views. For 3 hours, people are watching these. So what I'm trying to get at is this new media will enable people to really get to the nitty-gritty and the background story of any particular event in the news. And that's where my optimism lies.
So, if I may, sorry, I lost the window for. When I heard you respond, Paul, to Ray, I heard Ray is talking about video clips, and that people get their news by watching a moving image, and traditional newspapers is actually you need to read an article, and it's more than a page, or at least a page, and that instead you have like tweets or like messages of 5 lines or something, so that there is not just it's not just about the competing viewpoints, but that people are moving, that they want to hear and watch news as opposed to reading it. And I'm wondering how you have thought about all of us basically, so that people can't or don't want to read anymore, or not, or maybe I'm just being whatever like exaggerating the problem, that maybe still people love to read a book of 100 pages, but what do you think? Is the future generation still able to read, or what do you think? Or wanting to read, or capable of reading, or is it just impossible for their attention span?
No, I think reading is a very important part in most people's lives. And I'll give you a few examples. Way back in 1981, there was an article in the New York Times that cited a study that had been done in 1951, and then it had been redone again in 1981. And it was measuring the reading habits and the literacy levels of people. I don't remember exactly where it was, but in some Midwest city in the United States, let's say in Indianapolis, Indiana. And what the study found, to the surprise of just about everyone except me, and maybe a couple of others, is that literacy levels were exactly the same. It was different people, who were tested, but 1951, before this horrible television came along, and 1981, when television was in its heyday. But people in the academic world, and I've been arguing with them, it seems like for centuries, even though it's only been decades, they always like to be apocalyptic. Oh my God, motion picture is going to wipe out literacy. No one's going to ever want to read again because they, want to sit in some smoky theater. Okay, then television, oh, that's the end of literacy.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what came along is social media. That was predicted to be the end of literacy also. But even though Twitter, as you said, people just like to read tweets, sure, just, 200 words. But what those criticisms of Twitter, I think, almost always miss is very often those 200 words have a link that you can click on and read a much longer article. Yeah. So, and the other thing about social media, now YouTube is very important, but obviously the biggest players in social media are Facebook and Twitter. And although they both have a lot of images and moving images and sounds, the basic bloodstream of both those systems is text. You have to be literate to read even the 250 characters. And the same is true with a post on Facebook. All of which is to say, I am not the least bit concerned that literacy is going to die out. I think that anyone who's already literate, and that's most people, whatever it is they may read, know the satisfaction and value of that kind of communication. And then they encourage the, younger family members, their kids and so forth to read. So I don't see that as in jeopardy at all.
Okay, but now I'm going to give the counter argument. Just what I'm so intrigued by is Popper's objective knowledge. Why not more people are applying that? And that I think maybe it's something you really need to think while you're reading. And it's like you need to read maybe, I don't know, Paul, I'm just asking because that's for me the mystery for the last 4 years. So what was it that prevented that book from really becoming the transformative paradigm shifting instrument? And that I thought maybe you need to read it many times. You need to think about it, and you need to do slow reading. Yeah, that was the thing.
Yes.
I heard someone else say that Popper promoted slow reading and everyone else speed reading.
Right.
Yes. His Popper's books they are notably very dense in information. They're so rich that you can go back. That's one of the wonderful things about Popper's work, is that you can go back to them throughout your life and extract something of new value.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that the other thing, you probably all recall David Hume's complaint that his path-breaking book was born stillborn from the press and nobody read it. And it wasn't until years later that people recognized Hume as a brilliant philosopher making an important contribution. So the problem with any media presentation is you do it. You create it, you write it, you speak it, you go in front of a camera. But again, at that point, you might promote it as best you can, but you really, as Ray is saying, so I'm glad that Joe Rogan has millions and millions of views, but you cannot predict that or control that. And that's not an indictment of reading or literacy in particular, or books in particular. It's just a reality of basically all media presentations that seek to get things out to the public. There's no telling what the public likes, what they will like and dislike. And, Google Scholar, as some of you may know, there's a way on Google Scholar you can click on something and Google gives you the number of times your book or article was cited somewhere. And I'm always amazed, because I'm always surprised as to which one of my books is going to be the most cited. Actually, I mean, year after year, it's always Digital McLuhan, that 1999 book that I wrote, which I think is a great book, but not necessarily. For example, I have another book, New Media, which was written in 2009. Then
Yeah.
the second, it's much more relevant to social media, and that's like about 10th on the list of my books that are cited. So I've given up a long time ago trying to predict what is going to hit a large public.